All right, Steve, episode 4.
Episode 4.
Another one.
I can't believe it. Here we go again. We're
That's
still
right.
on the air.
We're still, hey, they're not. They
FCC hasn't pulled the
They
plug.
haven't shut us down yet.
Yes.
All right, so today we are going to talk about culture branding. Culture branding. So those of you might not know what culture branding is. Culture branding is something we came up with after doing a lot of research and kind of looking at the status of the industry right now. So essentially, in a nutshell, what culture branding is, at least to me, and this is what's going to be great, see what you think, see if you agree or disagree. Right. Culture branding to me is, so if you, right, there's culture and there's branding. So branding, a lot of people, when they think of branding, they think of marketing. Now, marketing and advertising is a big part of branding, of course, but anybody that knows us or, us as a collective or us as individuals know that we are big proponents of branding permeating company-wide.
Absolutely.
Right? It has to be in the DNA.
Yep.
Accounting, that's branding, right? I mean, just everything, sales, marketing, supply chain, logistics, all that kind of stuff, all has elements of branding.
Yeah.
But I think traditionally people think of it, branding as just being a big driver of marketing and vice versa. So culture branding, I'm going to use 2 companies for example. The first one's going to be Nike. The second one is going to be, roughly. They're a small company.
Right.
Small company out of Oregon. Yep.
Totally accidental.
Not sponsored by Nike.
Yeah, right.
This video brought to you by Nike. So we got Nike, then we got Apple.
Okay.
Right? So arguably 2 of the biggest companies in the world, let alone the U.S., let alone in business, period. So when you look at it, you look at the best marketing companies worldwide, or the best companies that have the best marketing.
Yes.
Those 2 rise to the top, right? And then if you look at those 2 same businesses that are the most successful, they have the most marketing, and the ones that have the best culture, at least internally or externally, however you want to start with. If you made a list, 3 separate lists, chances are those 2 companies hit all 3 lists.
Right.
Right. So with culture branding, it starts from within and it leads to that external. So what I mean by that, I guess, is you look at either of those companies, Nike and Apple, their employees, their leadership, everybody just like lives and breathes Nike or Apple.
Yes.
They wear it as a badge of honor. You go on LinkedIn, if it's an Apple employee, Nike employee, it's proud. Right. It's right there. Yeah. I mean, that's just how it is. Likewise, paralleling that wise, right? Here's where the branding comes in, the culture branding, the internal culture leading to the external.
Yes. Those
are the 2 top companies that you see the biggest fans of. I don't even want to call them customers, right? Because they're like fans.
Fans meaning fanatical.
Yeah,
they're crazy.
Yes.
Yeah.
So Apple, we'll take Apple. We'll start with Apple here. You don't see anybody else lining outside of a Best Buy or an Apple store for an hour or a week tenting out for the new iPhone, right? You just don't see that with Android or a Samsung phone or something like that. Right. It's only Apple. Same thing with Nike. They could have a limited release of, a throwback Jordan pair of shoes or some new launch, and you'll have people clamoring at the opportunity to get them, even if they're thousands of dollars for a pair of shoes. Right. You just don't see that with like Reebok.
Oreo cookies, nobody lining up outside the grocery store.
Right? Nobody.
Yeah.
You could lump Facebook into this category, right? Live and breathe working at Facebook. Yeah. And I mean, that's a whole other thing when it comes to branding and Facebook. I think this is totally off topic, but if you run a business and your core demographic is over, 45, you should probably be advertising on Facebook, right? So that's its own thing. But
why are you looking at me when you said that? Yeah.
No, and Coca-Cola, same thing. You ask somebody Coke or Pepsi, it is one or the other. Yeah. Nobody on earth says, either one surprised me. Right. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that's where we talk about culture branding. The branding of your company, having those results of those customers, those fans that are that dedicated is primarily because of your internal culture, the thing that you've built inside where people are your first cheerleaders and your first line of defense.
Right.
That's what leads to it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Obviously, I've never worked for either company, so I mean, maybe their culture isn't great internally, but public facing, it's incredible. Right. So that's kind of the gist.
Yeah. Okay.
So my question to you, maybe just to throw out there, what do you think about that? What are your thoughts about that whole, thought process, or that whole, what's the word I'm looking for, of culture branding?
This will come as no shock to people that know me. I'm kind of wired on the soft side of the world. And you look at people like one of our favorite guys, Simon Sinek.
Yeah.
His famous, that flip chart talk where
Yes.
it's really what launched Simon, and he used Apple as the
Yes.
company that talked about why.
Start with why.
Start with why. And he talked about the fact that Apple, Steve Jobs, and everybody there were very focused on why they exist. It wasn't that they just were focused on computers. It was a way of life.
Yeah.
And back in the day when Nike, hit everybody's radar, this just do it.
Yeah.
The reason I preface this response by saying that it's a soft thing, because they create a feeling. They create emotion. And it's not like they're selling this emotion to people. It's not like, hey, you should try believing this, or you should try feeling this.
Yeah.
Those people feel what they feel already when it comes to creativity or innovations as it relates to the Apple folks, the Apple fans and employees. When it comes to Nike, these are hardcore athletes, hardcore achievers. They want to perform the best. They want products and a lifestyle that supports that. And so I think when it comes to culture, that is a feeling that people have. You can feel it. And when it comes to branding, a lot of my career, I think I've said that branding is kind of that emotional connection between customers and the product or service.
Yeah, I think you brought up a great point, that emotional connection. It's almost like both of these companies created this lifestyle internal. It's not a department. Right. It's not even, hey, you work on a team. It's like you work in Apple, you work in Nike. There's no silo effect. They sell that lifestyle and emotion internally because they want to work for the best. Just like if you put on a pair of Nikes, it's because you want to perform the best. And same with Apple, right? Tons of companies sell computers. Tons of companies sell iPods. Even when they came out, the iPod, there were already, I don't know how many MP3 players. And it was like, oh, what's this, computer company doing coming out with an MP3 player, right? At the same time, people didn't hesitate when, any of the other computer companies like Dell or, anybody else who came out with an MP3 player.
Right.
But it was Apple. They started with the why. They weren't selling the product. They were selling the emotion, the seamless connectivity of all of their products. It was about why they did it, not what they did.
Exactly. Right. And these days you look at the modern day, some of the modern day Apple commercials, there's a lot of familiar faces. I think Oprah Winfrey is one of them, and a lot of people actually using the product, and what it projects is a lifestyle, a feeling, an ease of use, how convenient and comfortable and simple it is, but how it enriches music, how it enriches video, how it enriches the communication that we have, either typing or FaceTime or things like that.
Exactly. And it's almost like a unwritten rule in the creative world that you're probably working on a Mac. Yeah. Right? Yeah. You're probably working on an Apple product if you're in a creative field, video editing, photography, whatever it may be.
Right.
Gosh, a couple things came to mind when you were talking about that I wanted to touch on. One of them, which is a little bit off topic, but I think it still relates to the culture branding in the sense of, I talked about earlier, part of that internal culture is they're the first, your employees are your first cheerleaders and your first line of defense.
Yes.
That enables a company like Nike or Apple to take risks, right? So when Nike came out with that Colin Kaepernick campaign a while ago, and I'm probably going to butcher what the campaign was, but something about, if you're willing to sacrifice everything, even if it means everything or whatever that, there's so much backlash like that, but it allowed them to still push that out completely confident.
Yes.
Same with when they signed Tiger Woods.
Yep.
They made the first campaign around Tiger Woods very racially engaged or racially kind of motivated. And at the time it was a little, what's the word I'm looking for?
Edgy.
Yeah. Edgy. Yep. Risky. Yep. And so both times it paid off enormous, right? Yeah. You're always going to have the naysayers. You're always going to have the people like, oh, what did, Colin Kaepernick, this professional football player, sacrifice?
Right.
His day job, even though he still got millions in the bank. It's like, it wasn't about that to Nike, and it still wasn't. And they knew that maybe a short-term hit wouldn't even be a blip on a radar for long-term success. Like we talk about, like Simon Sinek talks about, they play that infinite game, and that allows them to do that because they know if somebody comes after Nike for something, their employees got their back 100%. Same with their customers.
Exactly. And some of their high profile people. I mean, we joke a lot. I joke a lot about the age difference between us, mostly because of your handsome, young, good looks.
Well,
but you've got this ageless wisdom. Back in the day when Michael Jordan hit, it's not just their their employees and their passion, that sort of thing, but there was a demeanor that Michael Jordan had. I mean, he was known in the league for his intensity. Now with the documentary out and everything else, people can see that firsthand. But they align themselves again with they didn't have to sell Tiger on winning and intensity. They didn't have to sell Michael Jordan on confidence and the intensity to win at all costs, to never give up. And yet, and some people might take me to task on this, there is a bit of, I think, humility in some of their people.
Yeah. I mean, I'm glad you brought up Michael Jordan too, because that just reminded me of another thing Nike did. When you're like, a lot of people want to know, like, how can I create that culture to make my brand that like impactful, explosive, dedicated, whatever it may be. One of the things they did when Jordan came out with his first shoe, the NBA banned it. I don't know if he talked about that during their documentary, if I'm just remembering it from something else, but they banned it and Nike was like, keep wearing them, we'll pay the fines.
Yeah. Yep.
Like, how cool is that? Like,
great
how
controversy.
dedicated is that, right? They paid those fines. They didn't have to. They could have sat back and be like, well, we'll just, wait our time. And once, the shoes are eligible to be in then we'll do that. But no, they were like, do it anyways. We don't care. This is what we're all about. This is why we do it.
They're leading the conversation.
Exactly.
They're a conversation starter.
And they knew that their employees would have their backs. They knew that short-term hit would equal long-term success. I mean, just another example.
They believed in the product. They believe in the personality. Like you're saying, they had a great line of defense in their employees and also these passionate customers. Seth Godin, who's a great marketing guy. I don't know if you know Seth Godin.
Huge guru.
He talks about, marketing and messaging and advertising. And he says, find out what story your customers want to hear and tell it to them.
Exactly.
And when you think about Apple and when you think about Nike, two of those immense giants, and we're not just talking about companies that are popular now.
Yeah,
the sustainability that those brands have had is very impressive. And we are talking about, and this is important, I think, to get this out there, that it's not just all culture. It's not just all branding.
For sure.
We're talking top-notch products.
Yep.
When it comes to Nike, the style, the innovation there, people buying the same shoe with different colors to go with different outfits. And it's tennis shoes, right? Back in the day. I mean, you just had one pair of tennis shoes, not anymore.
Yeah.
And then with Apple, it's the finest products.
It is.
The processors, the optics.
Yep.
A lot of times I look at my kids now who are, 22, 20, 18, and 13. They like the camera as much as it relates to their iPhone, as much as any other feature.
Exactly. And I'm one of those people that is guilty about that. I was never like super brand loyal to any particular thing, but I did like the way it felt using a Mac. Like my first Mac was like an iMac, I think.
Right.
And I was like, there's no use for an iPad. I could never see myself getting one. Well, a couple of years later, I have an iPad.
Yep.
I'd never wear an Apple Watch. I just wouldn't. I have no use for it. Well, I got an Apple Watch now. I think I have one of every one of their products just by default. And it's like, it's not that I didn't need them, because there was a reason I needed to get those. Yeah. And at the time I could have picked something else, but the seamless transition between all of them is what sold it. And I mean, that's just...
Talk a little bit about, from your perspective, your opinion, with Steve Jobs now out at Apple and the transition that has happened. What are some of your thoughts or insights on the building of that brand, the reinforcing, the evolution of that brand? How has that played out at Apple as far as you see it?
Yeah, I mean, I think when Steve Jobs passed away, it was already known that Tim Cook was going to take over, right? He had been with the company years and years and years. It wasn't some outside hire. It wasn't someone who had just joined the company a couple of years ago. And again, I don't know all the ins and outs of Apple, so I'm kind of shooting from the hip a little bit here, but it was a seamless transition again, just like their products. It was like they didn't even miss a beat. And everybody, Tim Cook was very good on stage like Steve Jobs was. Him, the like the head of creative, Joni, I think his name is, or I'm probably going to butcher that too, but I mean, that guy's fantastic too. He didn't go anywhere. Like the core of their executive team and leadership team, creative team, all of that kind of stuff, we're all still there.
Same size black turtlenecks.
That's right. Yep. Same size jeans, black turtlenecks. And so I think the transition from Steve Jobs to the Tim Cook era was seamless, and they kept coming out with products that Steve Jobs would have done anyways, right? If they would have completely changed the company and been like, nope, we're not going to do, the iPad anymore, or we're going to do some random out of the blue type thing, right? It would go back to like tube monitor, IMAX as a throwback. So
Right.
if they would have made some misstep, people would have raked them over the coals for sure. But I think the way that they were able to transition was great, and that's what kind of springboarded them. Right. You hear some people saying like, oh, their products are kind of getting stale in the sense of they're not as revolutionary as when Steve Jobs, but at the same time, you got to think Steve Jobs brought the iPhone, brought the iPad.
They pushed the bar far.
Huge.
They evolved fast. The innovation was unbelievable. At that time.
So, at some point, you're just not going to get that same level of innovation in new products.
Right.
But we're seeing already, they came out with their first new chip, that M1 chip. Obviously the iPhone 12s with the cameras and all, that's the thing. People don't carry a camera anymore. It's on their phone, just like you were saying, with your kids earlier. Yeah. So I think, I don't know if that quite directly answered your question, but I think that's really what set them up for the future. And
no, I think it did, because you're talking about the fact that, they didn't have to train Tim.
Exactly.
The passion that Tim has, the drive, the intensity, the enthusiasm, that I think that desire to remain on top, that you can't necessarily put that at that level anyway, put that into people. It has to be part of who they are. That I think.
And yeah, it just reminded me of two things too. When we started talking about this culture brand, we talked about having the great products. They did. You talk about the internal cheerleaders and first line of defense. They had that. They had a great leadership team. They had those pieces in play. They had that public perception already. So I mean, they were bound to succeed with Tim Cook anyways.
Correct.
The other thing too is when we look at this culture branding, when we talk about this internal cheerleader, we talk about Apple, we talk about Tim Cook. Kind of like I was just saying, those things already existed there, and they built that up. So when you look at like maybe a business is watching this and like, how can I get that? Make sure your products are rock solid. Make sure your leadership team is rock solid. We've talked about that in other podcasts. Make sure your culture is there. If not, start working on your culture. And all of those things is what's going to lead to that culture branding.
So I just want to break down for the purpose of this podcast that you said a couple of things there that are key. Your products, you said first. Make no mistake that those products, and we've said it already in this podcast, Nike's making great stuff. Their clothes perform, their shoes perform, and there's constant evolution from their key people like a Michael Jordan, like a Tiger Woods, etc. Apple is constantly innovating. Those are top-notch product. The other piece about culture and branding, I think about Amazon. Yeah. Sometimes it's not just about the best. That branding, that culture is more about easy and convenient, and dare I say, cheap.
Yeah.
And so when it comes to some of that, you have to have something that is unique. That's the first thing that you said as it relates to the products. Yeah. The second thing you said is the leadership. You have to have the right leadership. In working with companies, and if people are wondering, how do we set up the right culture? My experience and my opinion tells me that is about focusing on some very definable, clear, articulated core values.
Exactly. Yep.
That you put out into the marketplace, and people relate to that. And again, it's not something you manufacture these core values and say, we're going to go sell these. It's what's out there, what's important to the customer base, what's out there in that market space, and how do we meet that need, like Seth Godin says. So I think those core values are very important. Yep. You hire to that.
Yep.
You reinforce that stuff with your processes, your systems, your marketing, your performance evaluation systems, the way that you compensate and recognize people. All of those are very, very important pieces to the culture and branding puzzle, in case people are wondering, how do I get that done?
Hey, well, and like we talked about in the last podcast too, if you haven't checked out episode 3, we talked about how you just can't say, hey, we're going to have a good culture now. Right. You're going to trust you. She's going to trust him. Right. We're going to have fun. You can't just like say those things and wish them into existence. You actively have to work on them with definable goals, definable results, things like that. Yes. And then not to mention great products, but great services, right? We've talked about sexy accounting and other industries, right? That might not be your typical like really cool branding or is seen like that, right? Right. You can have that. Like think about it, just like you said earlier, from figure out what the customer wants or the story they want
Yeah.
to hear,
Yeah.
the product they
Yeah.
want to be sold, the service they need,
Yes.
and give that to them.
Right.
You can have an amazing culture and amazing culture branding where people are lining up for your services
Yes.
as an accounting firm or something like that. Something
Right,
that
right.
maybe is typically a little more less sexy than you think or whatever it may be.
Yes.
Right. But if I like have an accountant and they're just crushing it for me, I don't have to like lift a finger and their customer service is great. And if I randomly call and they get me to who I need to be talking to right away, like you can still have those things exist even if your brand isn't like Nike or Apple where you have just a product to sell.
So in a future podcast, this is just hitting me live right now. When you bring up accounting services, I think about, life insurance, financial services, some things like that, where, in the 80s or the 70s or maybe even the 90s a little bit, there was opportunities, I think, to differentiate yourself with, the favorite phrase at the time was value added.
Okay.
Some of the accounting clients that I've had over the years, I don't know if they all want to admit this yet. I think some of them will, that it's a commodity. That when you're hiring an accountant, a B2B, or even for us, individuals, I need my taxes done.
Exactly.
And so how do I determine right now, for the most part, which accountant I'm going to hire? A lot of times it gets down to price.
Yeah.
But when they're colluding like they are sometimes and they figure out what will the market bear on price, and the customer is like, gosh, the price is so similar. Maybe it's that I can, one of them's closer to my house. Well, now with everything electronic. So what you're talking about with the topic today, culture branding, there is a legitimate opportunity that people have to differentiate. If the price is almost the same, how does it feel?
And distance doesn't matter.
Exactly. What's the convenience? How simple can they make it? Does my day get better? Back in a business I worked in the late 90s, we talked about how customer satisfaction, that ain't the deal anymore. It's about customer delight. Something so good that somebody has to say, I got to tell you about my accounting firm.
Exactly.
I got to tell you about the grocery store that I experienced today.
Word of mouth is not dead. That's for sure.
Exactly.
No, that's so true. What's your unique identifier, right? Is it
right.
excellent communication? Is it what's going to set you apart exactly? Because if you're in the digital age, people can be often seen, very similar. So what's that unique identifier? How are you going to separate yourself? How are you going to close that lead with what you have, right?
Yep.
And that's exactly it.
So one of the last things I want to get on the table
as
it relates to culture and branding is, and we've said it a couple of times, but I just want to hit it hard, that this culture and branding, and you said this very well today, that it's not a push. You can't shove that out there, say, here's our brand. Culture and branding is a pull, which means it's a constant dialogue with employees, with vendors, with providers, with customers. It's a pull. How are we doing? What do you like? What are the problems? And then asking people, what do you anticipate? If there's no problems right now, what are some problems that you anticipate? How could we make it better? Are you delighted? Yes or no? And the customer might say, yeah. Well, yeah doesn't mean, hell yes, I am delighted. Well, what could we do? Right?
Yeah, it's not about satisfying a customer. It's not about customer satisfaction, customer delight. You don't want them to just be satisfied with your product or service.
Yes.
You want them to be over the moon about it.
Exactly.
You want them to feel like they're getting the best possible out there.
Right.
Right. And as it relates to that too, dang, now I just lost my train of thought. What were you just saying with
about the push and the pull?
The pull, right? Yeah, the listening. The
asking, the dialogue.
Yep, listening, anticipating those possible problems by doing a customer journey map, which is huge in marketing. A lot of marketing people watching this will know what a journey map is. In a sense, for those of you who don't know, it's just essentially finding the journey that a customer takes with your business, from researching to owning to maintaining, if that's involved, or whatever the process looks like for you. It's the same thing. Anticipate those problems. Listen, if I sell you a product or a service, what could possibly go wrong, and anticipate that so it doesn't happen.
Yeah.
That's almost as important as just pushing the product out in the first place.
Yep. One conversation I've had in the last year, and that was about trying to figure out, it was a group of technical people. They were service providers. They were on site at customers, and the company was trying to figure out, how can we get these people that are seen by the customer as experts, they're a source of information, they trust them because they were out on a regular annual basis. The company wanted to figure out, how can we leverage the relationship that they have with those people to cross-sell a different service?
Yeah, there we go.
And the CEO of the company wanted to engage those people and say, okay, what would it take, technical people who are dealing with a customer, what would it take for you to bridge into a conversation to risk, in their opinion, risk their own comfort and the quality of that relationship with the customer to ask them about a different service. Long story short, overly simplified, they said, we'd like to get a spiff, a couple or $300 spiff. And so the CEO took this to ownership, and the owner in this case literally said, I don't care what they think. That's their job.
Yeah.
That's their job. I'm not giving them a spiff. I don't care whether they like it or not. I expect them to do. Well, guess what happened? How many of those additional services do you think? Almost nothing.
No.
What do you think that did to morale when you start to engage them in a conversation? What do you think that did to the culture?
Yep.
And what do you think that ultimately did to the brand when the rubber meets the road, when the boots are on the ground?
And that's a great point, that kind of authoritative leadership. And we're going to get into that in a future podcast, maybe episode 5, 6, who knows?
Yeah.
Stay tuned.
Yeah.
But that's a great point, because one little misstep like that, and we just talked about earlier about how leadership is so important when it comes to culture and branding.
Right.
If that leadership is not in place to be able to have that capacity to make those correct decisions or make that process seamless like that, ask those questions, do the pull, not the push.
Right.
That's devastating.
Last thing I'm going to say about this, if we're kind of winding this up, is culture and branding is what other people say it is.
Yeah.
If the leader, if the owner, if the executive team, the board of directors, if they can articulate it, but the employees don't feel it,
yes,
you don't have
That's so true, because you could be like, we're the greatest, we're the best. Well, are you? What are your customers saying? You could say that all day long.
Yep.
But the proof is in the numbers. The proof is in the pudding. Like, what are they saying? So if they're not picking up what you're putting down, you're not the best, no matter what you think.
That's exactly right.
And I'm glad you said that. I was taking some notes earlier. I just want to make sure I didn't miss anything here on when we're going through this podcast.
Well, you're looking up that. I spent part of my career with Dale Carnegie Training, and Peter Handel at the time was the CEO of Dale Carnegie, and he went to a meeting, one of these regional meetings, and this is probably going back to the late 90s. One of these regional meetings for Walmart, and it was a Saturday, and all these folks were working very hard. Walmart was taking the world by storm at that point in time, and so all these store managers, I believe, gathered, I think in Atlanta, on a Saturday morning, and they all gathered, and then somebody went down on stage and to kick the meeting off, and they had these signs with letters on it, WALMART, and so they would shout it out, give me a W, give me an A, and they'd spell this whole thing. What's it spell? Walmart. Who's number one? And Peter Handel was stunned when the whole crowd said to the answer to the question, who's number one? The customer.
Yes. I love that story. Oh, that's awesome.
And here's the CEO of Dale Carnegie Training going to this thing, and he absolutely knew what they were going to say to who's number one. He knew what was going to come out of their mouth.
And when
he was wrong.
When you were listening to Steve right there, did you think he was going to say the customer, or did you think, what I mean?
Yeah.
And that goes great with the water cooler conversation we just did recently about how when you're looking at what kind of leadership you have and how you can ask those two questions, watch that water cooler conversation. It's on the YouTube channel. Yeah. That's exactly it. How are your people responding? How are your employees, your leadership responding? Because that's going to cue you into not only what type of leadership you have, but the way people think at your company and the culture internally at your company.
Right. And understand all the leaders out there, all the owners and everybody is so process driven and time. It just takes time and money. Is it going to take you time and effort and resources? Is it going to take you off track to measure the culture, to assess? Yes, it is. But if you really believe that it's a value, and hopefully we've said a healthy amount today to convince you that it is, it's going to take time. But once you get in the practice of doing this, you're going to find out that your people are more engaged, your customers are more engaged, your processes and systems are going to get much more efficient. You're going to innovate better than you ever did because you've got a constant dialogue going that basically says, how are we doing? And who are we to you?
Exactly. And to kind of leapfrog off that, to playing that infinite game versus the finite game, very different, right? And arguably, if you're playing the finite game more often than not, it is very detrimental to your long-term gain, because you're looking at these short-term in the moment gains or pushes or whatever it may be. It reminds me of this company recently on a Mother's Day week. We're pushing out material every single day of the week for 7 or 8 days in a row. And it was such a short-term push for a holiday that it is going to affect their long-term goals. I mean, that's not a good look. It's not a good process. It's not. So you have to play that infinite game. You have to make those investments you're talking about and those processes, those procedures, pull, listen, do all those things. Yeah. And I think that's a great point for people to take away from this.
No doubt.
And speaking of people, the one last thing, and I'm glad I looked at my phone, the one last thing that I wanted to touch base, and we kind of scratched the surface on it when we first started this podcast, but right now I think a lot of people in the U.S., probably let alone the world, labor is always a huge question mark, right? Labor is always a huge, I don't want to say, well, I guess I could say issue. Would you agree that that's an issue to a lot of companies, depending on your industry?
A la Jim Collins from Good to Great, labor is always an issue, but the right labor.
Yes, exactly.
Is always an issue.
So when you look at the culture branding, this is another great point to this, this name we've given it of culture branding is these internal employees wait years to be hired at a place like this. It is their dream not to create an iPod, not to design the next Nike shoe necessarily. It's to be able to say, I work for Nike, I work for Apple, right? That's where you're going to get those hires. That's where you're going to get the people just knocking down your door to work at your company, not the pull or not the push of, hey, we're hiring. Right. Come work for us. We're really great. We have all these things. Yep. If there's a company doing that, but their culture sucks or their brand sucks, and you have another company down the road who's not saying, hey, come work for us, they're just, they let their actions speak for themselves. They let their products speak for themselves, and they have that internal culture. Chances are, even if they don't have like all the little finite details that this company might have, chances are they're going to want to go to this company because it's their dream. It's that lifestyle. It's the ability to say, I work for that company, right? So now all of a sudden not only are you fixing that right labor shortage, you're also hiring people on that facilitates and enhances that internal culture. Which is a huge part of this culture branding.
That's right. And it's and a lot of times it's a feeling. It's what it feels like to do the work. They can do the work anywhere, but it feels better to be on that sort of team. We should also source, you're talking about finite and infinite. Simon Sinek talks about a lot of that. And if people haven't heard that, I think that that's worth, looking into.
Yeah, check it out.
And then we should probably plug, which I don't think we have, and that is the fact that if people are listening to this and thinking, okay, you guys, you two smart dudes, hopefully they're thinking that.
I hope so.
How do we do this? Can you guys help us? And we can absolutely do that. And they can,
I think that's one of the biggest things we do.
Yep.
So absolutely.
Help people figure out how to integrate this stuff, how to operationalize it, how to engage, their employees, their customers, and clarify, solidify their brand, sharpen that up, make it crisp, tangible.
With accurate, attainable, achievable, trackable goals and results.
Yes.
Make it something tangible, not just, all right, we're going to have a good culture here, everyone.
Yep. Boy, wasn't that great? We spent a couple of bucks on culture and branding. It was a good 6-month exercise. We're no different than we were before, but we feel great about it.
Yeah, I think we might have learned something, right? Right? So you're going to trust you now. You're going to trust you now. Everything's going to be good. We're going to have the best products randomly, too.
We will not do that.
Exactly. Yep. Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, awesome. I think that's all I got. I think it might be a little bit shorter podcast this time, but I really hope you guys got kind of a new look on both branding and culture and, what we refer to as culture branding. And kind of to recap, like we've kind of been doing that culture branding that exists with the parallel between your internal cheerleaders and your external fans is what creates that brand. And I think that's one of the most important things to take away is knowing that, understanding that, but also now how can you as a business put that into play?
Yep. A lot of times it starts with your people, having the right people, and finding those believers. Yeah. So
exactly.
Great topic today.
Yeah. No. Thanks again, Steve. Episode 4, Culture Branding.
Right.
See you next time.
See you next time.